to Reels on the Rocks, the show where your hosts Whiskey and Sweet Tea discuss film from the unpretentious perspective. Let's relish in the beauty of trash this shameless September. First up, Jackass the movie. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and as always, please be advised that spoilers are ahead.
I'm Whiskey. Welcome to Jackass.
Oh my god. And I'm Sweet Tea at Jackass reluctantly. I don't know what to respond to that with.
This one's called The Podcast.
Yes, the podcast. Yes, okay.
No.
I'm starting to get the pattern here.
Before we start putting electroshock nodes on our testicles, T had an interesting recent topic that everyone's talking about, but you're going against the grain, and I think that's a good way to kind of ease us into the trash we will be sampling.
Right. Okay, so, I mean, drama's still pretty trashy, but this is, like, high class compared to what we'll be discussing later.
Yes.
In the podcast. So, as
yes,
you know...
It's like getting raw oysters as an appetizer for a chili cheeseburger that is undercooked.
Okay, I'm so glad you said for a chili cheeseburger. I thought you were going in a completely different direction with having oysters.
No. Like, something fancy and then just garbage food that will make you feel sick.
See,
but yes.
Oysters are aphrodisiacs.
Yes,
That's where I thought you were going with
and
this.
Chili cheese... No. No. But yes, so... Everybody has been talking about Blake Lively lately.
Right.
Regarding a movie. Yes, regarding a movie I did not see, but T definitely did because it's right up T's alley. But everybody's been hating on Blake Lively, and I kind of messaged you like, "Oh, what did you see all this stuff coming out about her?" And you had an interesting kind of take on it. So why don't you explain? For anyone who might not even know what either of us are talking about, even though I'm sure someone listening probably does.
I feel like Moist Critical right now, back when he used to do just strictly drama. If you don't know. So those of you who don't know what the whole Blake Lively It Ends With Us situation is supposedly people are piling on Blake Lively for the way that she's been promoting the movie, and then now they're going back into her past now, and they're finding stuff that was problematic, and now they're just basically dumping on her because this is a movie that has to deal with a very sensitive topic of domestic abuse, and the way she was promoting it as opposed to the way the director Justin Baldoni has been promoting it, people have been talking about, and then now they're saying things like Blake's not a girl's girl. It's this whole thing. So what's interesting to me about this is because this first came about to my attention as this started as basically people were just literally just speculating about why Blake Lively is in the cast are not doing interviews with Justin Baldoni, why he's doing interviews separately, not with the cast. And then they started being like, oh, I noticed that she and Colleen Hoover, who I don't know if you know this, she's the one that wrote the book, which was an international bestseller. It hasn't been as controversial as the movie is, but there's been some discussion about its portrayal of things too, which will sort of play into what I'm talking about with my take on it. And then they came out that, she and Colleen Hoover weren't following each other they were following each other, that weren't following Justin Baldoni on Instagram. So then people started digging in all this sort of stuff. And then they found, somebody had recorded, like some pedestrian recorded some scene they did on the street where it looked like, Blake was directing Justin Baldoni on how to hold her. And they're like, oh, she's taking over the movie, she's taking over the directing, and then she made some comment about Ryan Reynolds writing a scene for the movie, and then people are like, why is she bringing her husband into this? And it's been a whole thing, and everybody's just been dumping on her about this. The big thing, though, that this kind of all culminated as is they really do not like how she has been promoting this movie on talk shows and everything else, because like I said, this movie, as I mentioned, is about a relationship and domestic abuse that comes about in this relationship. Like, it's not like it's a side thing that, it's the main meat of the story and how the main character of Lily deals with this and how she gets out, that sort of thing. And so people have really been dumping on her about this. And I've kind of been like, look, I could be wrong. But the way I look at it is none of this really started. This discussion about it hadn't really started until people started digging into her Instagram and like, oh, why isn't she following the director? The director's following her. Why isn't she following her? She's taking over the movie, this sort of thing. But, you know, she's been promoting this on talk shows much in the same way that I feel when the book came out, kind of how the book has been sort of presented and other promotional material has been presented for this movie. I don't think that her portrayal, that her, you know, depiction of, you know, grab your girlfriends and wear your florals, you know, is necessarily her idea. I'm 98% sure that the studio really wanted to promote this as more of a chick lit film, regardless of the serious subject matter. And if you look at Whiskey, I don't know, I remember if I sent that. I sent you a cover of the book, what the cover of the book
Yeah.
looks like. And the book does not reflect these, the cover of the book does not reflect these serious themes. The author is there with her and she's loving the way it's being promoted. And I think the problem here is essentially the studio has a particular way they want to promote this film. They're not thinking about it in the way that I would put that, you know, modern audiences are, where this is a serious story about the dangers of domestic abuse, the pitfalls of it, the, you know, the unable to get out sort of situation. And they literally just see this as an adaptation of a book that was popular among women's reading groups, which it was. A lot of women have read this book. And the book really is, from all the stuff I've heard, I've picked it up myself. I have not read it yet, but from everything I had heard back when this book first came out was, you know, it was a lot of women were reading this and they were either saying, you know, it was very polarized. Some people would say, this is my experience. I felt this. I understand Lily. Other people think it, you know, romanticizes abuse. And you know, so the subject matter is, the book is already polarizing in itself. And so, but the studio who does set how they want stuff to be promoted, and especially if she's appearing with most of the cast, how they want to promote things, they do want this to be a book that, you know, that groups of women who have read the book together come together to read, to see this movie and celebrate in, I'm trying to figure out how to, with the end of the movie, I guess, without having to spoil too much of what's going on in the film. And well, it is tone deaf. It is tone deaf, but I don't think it's all Blake's fault. Like, I was just at a theater in a major metropolitan area about an hour north of me, and I sent you a picture of this, Whiskey, and I'm like, this is what the studio sent the theater to promote this film. And it's like a standee cutout of Lily's flower shop where you can pose and take pictures. Now, does that seem like, and that was not Blake Lively, that was the studio and the distribution company, all this, does that seem like the studio is taking this seriously as a story about domestic abuse or not? And so that was kind of my take on this. I do think she's being, and I could be wrong because I don't know the ins and outs and the backs of deals of all this sort of stuff, is she's being unfairly maligned as the villain here who's not taking the story seriously, when I do think the orders come down from the studios. I mean, she does have a producer credit, but
let me interject.
Go ahead.
Just because here's the thing. So I have not seen the movie, but it's been kind of a whirlwind of me learning from me seeing the trailer to me learning what it was about via the trailer to hearing about the backlash to seeing what people are talking about. And also, like, I learned about the book's, you know, meteoric rise, which is interesting in and of itself. So for people in my camp who probably maybe have never even seen this, I saw the trailer before watching Twisters, which, man, it's really funny how trailers get grouped with movies based on the genre. Like Twisters, it's like an adventure movie, it's a disaster movie, it's a romantic movie. So, like, there was everything. I was getting, like, horror trailers, I was getting rom-com it was kind of hilarious just how all over the place. But so because of that, I was getting trailers for movies I probably would not have seen, and one of them was for It Ends With Us. And I was I'd never heard of the book, so I was kind of going along for the ride. And at first I'm like, okay, this is like a rom-com, and then the you know it reveals kind of what it's about, and I'm like, oh, that's weird. Why was it? And her name's like Lily Bloom, and she works at a flower shop. Like, it feels like almost like a romance novel turned into a movie at first, and then it gets really dark, and then it has kind of an uplifting sort of ending to the trailer. So, which I will get into, where I could see this actually being intentional on the author's part and the filmmaker's part, and actually maybe even being kind of a smart way of doing this. But so that's where that ended for me, and I was like, that's kind of weird. I don't know why the trailer made it seem like such a lovey-dovey kind of subject, but I moved on. And then when all of this drama came out, that's another thing that's really interesting about the book. So the book came out in 2016, and it wasn't like a flop, but it wasn't a bestseller. What made the book a bestseller is 4 years later, during the lockdown, people had a lot of free time, and they rediscovered the book, and book talk was a thing by that point. And book talk loves smut, but they also love romance novels. So
and they love aesthetically pleasing covers.
Oh, yes. So, and also, the other thing I find kind of interesting is domestic violence cases rose dramatically during lockdown. So that makes me also kind of wonder if some of the people who discovered the book might have been survivors of their own situation. Who knows? But that's an interesting thing in and of itself. By the time it blew up, the sequel was already out. So, that's a thing. So then, when all of this came out, I was just seeing videos on YouTube like Blake Lively, what's going on? And just like any other drama, when a million people are covering it, I'll click on a video of someone who tends to have an opinion I agree with. In this case, it was D'Angelo Wallace, which he's not always perfect. Like, he kind of had a weird take, like you said, about the Snow White movie. But he tends to be pretty even. He certainly leans a certain way politically, but he's not he never gets overly emotional, or he tends to have pretty even takes, or at least has a logical explanation for why he has his takes. And he kind of explained, because I was like, why is everyone dumping on her? And yeah, it went into, she has a cocktail named after the abuser in the movie. She said the whole get your florals thing. And she just kind of has a much more happy-go-lucky kind of way of marketing the movie. I know what you mean, because typically, people can't go off script, so to speak, when it comes to marketing movies. They have marching orders from the studio. I guess my first question would be, why do you think the director and other actors and stuff are not going about it the same way as her, if it's a studio mandate? And that's another thing with people getting kind of, drawing conclusions. I remember she was doing an interview with her co-star who plays the abuser, and while she's talking, she's kind of going off topic onto cutesy things, and you can see her co-star getting kind of physically almost face palming, not literally, but he's got that expression on. So that's where so if you believe it's marching orders from the studio, why is everyone else going about it in a different way?
So the main one that people bring up when they talk about this, the two ways of promoting this film, is that they always talk about Blake Lively, and it's usually Blake Lively with some or one of her co-stars. And then the other one is usually Justin Baldoni. Now, what's interesting about this is Justin Baldoni, with his own production company, actually purchased and secured the rights to make a film adaptation of this novel, and then he was able to later then negotiate deals with larger studios for distribution and all that fun stuff. So my main thing with that is, again, I could be wrong, but just giving everybody the benefit of the doubt here, is he has a different deal than other people do. He's the one that brought the source in. He's the one that had the controlling what is it called? The rights to the film.
Stake, right?
Yeah, he had a control. He has a more of a controlling stake in this. I know people are saying, well, Blake Lively with her name and everything. She does, but it depends on who made the deal with her. If it was Justin's production company, or was it
a producer credits also kind of doesn't always mean anything.
Right.
Like sometimes you get a producer credit. Like she is a famous actor, so they might just be like, "Oh, star in this movie, and we'll give you a producer credit."
Right.
It's a meme at this point, especially like we haven't talked about the Oscars in a while, but people have commented about how ridiculous it is how many people come up for Best Picture, because there'll be like 30 producers for a film, and often it's things like that. So yeah,
right.
I get what you mean. He has the controlling stake. Blake Lively, she's a producer, but that doesn't necessarily mean she
right. She's essentially she's a non-writing producer, which according to American Dad means she gets paid to do nothing. Which I'm not saying that's the case, but that's just a funny joke.
So how so he has a controlling stake in it. Why do you think? So are you saying like that is why he is able to kind of promote it differently, or? And also, like, why again, it's also her co-stars. Like, I think part of the reason she's getting singled out is from everything I've seen. I haven't, like, watched every interview like all these commentary YouTubers have done. But the vibe I'm getting from what everyone's been saying is, like, she's the only one marketing it this way. So why do you think that is? Like, do you think everyone else felt, this is kind of icky, like, let's not be too happy about it or whatever? Or like, do you think like if it's marching orders from the studio, that's where I'm like, well, why then is everyone else going off script?
So the thing is, everybody else isn't going off script from what I've seen. Now I could have missed an interview here or there, but from what everyone else isn't going off script. Like I said, the two people they're talking about is they'll talk about Blake Lively and they will talk about Justin Baldoni. Justin Baldoni is very in depth about when he talks about like, for example, he wanted to make very, very sure when he made this film that it depicts abuse from a female gaze, not from a male gaze, sort of, not instead of from the controller, from the being controlled person. He's talked about this much differently. Other people have talked about it. They've touched on it briefly. It's not been like the point of the interview or anything sort of like that. I think the reason why people are picking up on specifically her is because she's essentially the star power in the movie. There's other actors that have done great stuff in here too. Justin Baldoni's done some stuff. I literally cannot think of other people in the movie. It sounds so bad.
Well, I mean, she's Gossip Girl. She's got
she's huge. So of course she's going to become the face of whatever the promotional thing is. And then now her co-star, who played Atlas in the movie, and I forget what his actual name is. Now, he's gone on record as saying, why we need to like stop kind of slang, because people have kind of been upset with her and with Colleen Hoover too. Once again, Colleen Hoover back in the day with her book, she at one point wanted to publish a It Ends With Us coloring book. And people were like, no. That she had to apologize for that. And so he's basically kind of like, why are we going after all the women in this movie? That's ironic, in this movie about domestic abuse and survivors and stuff. You're going after the women in the movie who are not the abusers.
My theory for why the director is being a little bit more careful about how he markets it is because it's a man. I feel like if he were, it's a fun Sunday afternoon movie, I could see people really coming after him if that were the case. So, like, at least that's my theory as to why he is not going about it quite that way. But it is, you're bringing up an excellent point, because the author got backlash originally too, not nearly to this degree, or else I probably would have heard about it years ago. But it is interesting. It kind of brings up a point, because a lot of feminist voices and creators and commenters and stuff always talk about how, like, women are held to a higher standard if they do anything even, presumably wrong. People just, are relentless. And that seems to be the case. Like, again, I kind of, from that video I watched, I kind of saw why people were upset, because I was just like, wow. Again, like, my opinion of the movie, I had not seen it. I thought the trailer was off-putting, but when the movie was like number 2 at the box office when it opened, and everyone seems to be liking the movie, I'm like, okay, the movie must be fine. It's probably not off-putting. I feel like if it was really flippant about domestic violence, people would be coming after it a lot harder. So I'm sure the movie's fine. But then, yeah, when I was seeing all the stuff with Blake Lively, again, everyone's putting every little thing she does under a magnifying glass, but I could see why people were getting mad. I was like, that is kind of a weird thing to do. Like, I could see you naming cocktails after a bunch of characters, but who is essentially the villain in a very a villain in a fun movie. I could see, if there was if Charlize Theron did a cocktail cookbook for Mad Max Fury Road, and she had wow, how am I blanking on his name?
Yeah, how are you blanking?
Right, you know who I'm talking about. Though.
I know who you're talking about. You talking about from Fury Road or from Furiosa?
Fury Road. He's in both, but Fury Road, it's oh my god.
Oh my god, yeah, I know you're talking. It's the guy who controls the mountain with the water.
And we're both forgetting. Well, you know what I mean. Like, if someone made a cocktail after the villain for Fury Road, like, that's kind of a silly movie. It's a little more fun. I could see it. But when it's like a domestic violence thing.
It's like why it's okay to collect Darth Vader, figures,
yes,
even though he's technically a mass murderer.
Yeah, hey, the Empire's fascist coded. You never see them commit a space holocaust, so it's okay.
I mean, blowing up the planet's pretty explicit space holocaust.
That is kind of true. You know what I mean. Anyway,
I know what you mean.
So here is my again. I have not seen the film, but here's my theory as to why the book is the way it is, why the trailer was kind of coded that way, and my theory is to like kind of why the movie gets it right, even if the way it's framed might be sort of off-putting. I feel like because one thing, speaking of like punishing women for supposed wrongdoings or whatever, like often in domestic violence situations, victim blaming is very common in both gender cases, but women especially. It's like, oh, you should. Well, why did you marry him then? Why did you date him if he was such a douchebag? And it's like they don't seem like it at first. So take,
which is kind of the point of the trailer. I know you were
that's
like,
what I
the
mean.
trailer's off-putting. The trailer literally on a second, she even says 15 seconds can change everything. That's why.
And that's what I mean when I say like. So my theory, having not seen this film, I think that's intentional, and I'm sure the author intended it to be that way too. Where it's sort of almost like a storybook romance, and then the shit hits the fan.
Yeah.
Like, ooh, her name is Bloom. What was her first name again?
Lily.
Florent? Lily Bloom. Ooh, like, so she's a flower. And it's all very like, oh, it's so amazing and romantic and then, he shows his true colors. And then, she gets out of, and that's the title. It ends with us. And it looked like she gets with another guy after cutting ties with the first guy. Haven't seen the movie, but I feel like that is why it works, is that it's kind of almost like a reality check kind of deal, where the beginning of the movie feels very much like a storybook romance, and then it gets really real. I don't know if I'm right about that, but that's kind of what I'm assuming feel like it's like in the book and everything.
We'll get more into that with the review at the end of the year, as far as how the movie felt, but I was gonna say it's just and then so not only were they dogpiling her, but because of that now people started going through and I sound like such a Blake Lively apologist. I have like no stake in Blake Lively at all.
Part of the reason I think this is worth talking about is, even though I'm very I'm not really leaning either way in this, is I do find it annoying when people don't like somebody and so they just go like, and I know what you're getting into. They went to like past tweets and stuff.
Yeah, they went to like
the past tweets they're not good looking, but it's just kind of like at this point now you're just reaching for reasons to like hate on her. Right, and this is like a tale as old as time. Anytime like a cancellation happens, like it's not enough to just say I don't like the way they marketed this movie. I'm going to become an internet archaeologist. I'm going to find every wrong thing she ever said. Right, and it's annoying. Even when it's someone I don't like, it's stupid, and it's not really like it's basically like an angry hate mob at that point.
Right, and that's basically what this has turned into. And I'm a big believer people can grow. People can say problematic things, have problematic issues, and say stuff in the past. And I do believe that people have the right to change if they show the change and things like that. But like one of the things they kept pulling out was this interview I guess she did. They thought she was being mean and dismissive of this reporter. And so this reporter, of course, waited until the Blake Lively backlash had started to talk about how this was the worst celebrity interview she'd ever done. And I've watched it. Yeah, Blake's not exactly, super chill there, but I also kind of think this just looks like you gave a bad interview. Like I'm not saying that her ignoring you was okay, but overall you lost control of this interview.
I remember
that. It's not a good look.
I thought she was. That's another one. I thought she was being kind of bitchy in that. I will say that. So the reporter or the interviewer did not say that now. She said that was the worst interview she'd ever given years ago. Just people dug it up. I remember from the D'Angelo video I saw. Like I remember pausing and seeing that it was from a few. She posted that years after the interview, but it was also years before this movie. So it's another one of those things people found. Yeah, so I'm sure she probably does still feel that way, but she did not wait until this movie came out for so.
So it's a misinformation I had.
Exactly. So it's like it's in the middle. Like she did say it years later, but if I remember correctly, I think she posted that in like 2020 or something. So like whatever. Like she's not trying to dogpile. It's just again, it's the internet archaeologist digging that up. Like, oh look, this interviewer who interviewed her in 2016, 4 years later, posted this. So, like, but yeah.
Well, the worst part about that whole interview, and I hate that people did this, is so she did this, like you said, Blake's a little bitchy in it. I personally don't think she was a very good interviewer in the interview either. And then when she writes about the worst interview ever, then she brings in her own personal trauma with having miscarriages. Like, how was Blake supposed to know that? It's just like, that has nothing to do with whether or not the interview was good or bad. But that's beside the point. But people are bringing all that stuff in, talking about she's not a girl's girl now. And I'm just like, y'all, stop. And I just want to point out, neither side has spoken. Now, supposedly people are claiming Blake's put out stuff in the press saying that Justin was, misogynistic on set or whatever. And supposedly Justin's hired a crisis PR manager. I'm like, listen, neither side has made a statement on this. Because they're also trying to go on what the beef between the two of them is. Like, Blake tried to take over and she's so controlling. And then now they're saying, that Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively, once the it couple, are now, the cringe couple. And I'm just like, y'all just, like, seriously chill out. Like, neither side has spoken on what went on backstage, if anything. And it's really not our place to vilify or canonize people based on what we think may have happened or not happened. So...
Well, and also saying they're the cringe couple, I beg to differ. I'm sorry, you can be annoyed with Ryan Reynolds all you want, but his box office numbers are saying differently. Like,
I remember people being like, well, why is Ryan Reynolds at the premiere of It Ends With Us?
Because they're married.
He's her husband.
Yeah. No, and here's the thing too. Like, if the whole thing about like, oh, he wrote part of this scene, that is annoying. If she did say that, like, if he just suggested she say something to improvise, like saying, oh, he wrote this. I agree that that's annoying, but it's also like, it's like an anecdote from someone on set or something. Like, it's not a verifiable thing that was said, and I'm pretty sure when you saw the movie, you did not see Ryan Reynolds' name in the credits as a writer. So, no, like, what are you even talking about at that point? Like,
right.
It could just be something she's being cute about in an interview, like, oh, my husband's also a writer. Like, if he got a writing credit for something like that, I'd be annoyed, but it didn't happen, and supposedly it might not have even happened at all because it's just kind of from someone on the internet saying it happened.
Well, and basically, and so the thing with that, this is actually interesting though, is again, I watched totally reliable sources like Spill Sesh and T-Spill, but they were talking about, this is an interesting take though, because they were talking about how, I guess, somebody had asked Justin about whether or not he wrote something. He was like, oh, I thought, Blake had ad-libbed that scene. And so it sounds like he kind of just, worked with Blake Lively and said, hey, like with his wife, it might have just been like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if you said something like this? And I think, and people are saying maybe that's what she meant by wrote, but they said if he actually wrote something because of the timing of production and stuff on this film, and some of it was affected by the writer's strike. If he actually did physically like write something for this movie, he could get in trouble with the WGA. I don't think it's going to go that far, but that is an interesting thing to bring up.
As I said, like, if his name was in the credits as a writer for just an offhand line he suggested she ad-lib, I would find that annoying if he got a writing credit for that. But again, so far it sounds like fantasy. You saw the movie. I'm sure you would have noticed if his name was in the writer's credits.
Yeah.
Didn't happen. Like, I'm not even convinced if because I remember that anecdote too, and I think it was just someone saying that on Twitter. Okay, like,
well, no, she did say that in a red carpet interview.
Oh, okay,
she did say that.
Okay, well, again, she could just be. She might just be being cute, you know.
Yeah.
Like, my husband said this, so he's a writer too. It's whatever.
But it's
them saying that they're a cringe couple. I don't know what you're talking about.
This is what I think happened. I think it was a mixture of the stuff going on with It Ends With Us, this drama happening, and then the fact that It Ends With Us came out right around the same time Ryan Reynolds was out there heavily promoting Deadpool and Wolverine. So it was kind of just like you couldn't escape them. They were just there. And then they were like, well, why is Hugh Jackman at the premiere? Well, Hugh Jackman's a friend of theirs. If she's a producer on the movie, she probably got a couple extra tickets. She's going to invite his friend, and Ryan's probably thinking, oh, good cross promotion, which I know people can be like, ooh, this isn't a way to cross promote with a domestic violence movie. This is just how show business works.
And frankly, I mean, having a reference to the movie in a Deadpool movie, I wouldn't put it past Deadpool to joke about. Like, that's kind of the whole thing's silly. I think it's refreshing to hear your side of things. I kind of wanted to see what you thought when I messaged you like 2 weeks ago or whenever it was. But I think it is valuable to play devil's advocate sometimes, because I feel like a lot of wild accusations are being thrown out there about this.
Yeah.
And I will say, I know where everyone's coming from, because as someone who is just completely out of the loop, the clips I saw of her were off-putting, I'm not gonna lie, but also, like, it's a movie, and frankly, like, the movie, the way it was marketed in the trailer I found off-putting, but it apparently didn't ruin the movie for a lot of people, and that's it at the end of the day. If the movie were disrespectful, I think there would be something to talk about.
Yeah.
Like, people are weird. Like, there's plenty of times when really good movies have been marketed by actors acting like weird, crazy people.
Right. And like I said, and there is, like, if this was a discussion about whether or not the film itself was romanticizing domestic abuse or not, that's a conversation worth having, and one that has interesting and has intrinsic value. I think whether or not there's drama going on behind the scenes or the way that she's promoting the movie, I don't think that's really, a valuable conversation to have around this, because there are some people who do still think the movie romanticizes domestic abuse. I have my own personal thoughts on that. I'm not going to get into them here about that. But like, if the backlash was, Blake, how could you do this? Because as a woman, most women are domestic violence survivors. Why would you participate in a movie that's so disrespectful to this topic? That would be different. I would understand serious backlash there. But when it's just how she's promoting the movie, which I don't think is entirely her doing, I don't see why everyone's now making stuff up, archaeologically digging up things. It's just like, listen, everybody just stop until we have actual facts out here, okay? Everyone just chill.
I'm going to use a different franchise for my closing thoughts.
Okay, go ahead.
Pretty much my take. At the end of the day, people will remember the movie and not the interviews and promotional material. Years and years ago, for one of the numerous Fast and the Furious movies, Vin Diesel gave one of the cringiest drunken interviews of his career, in which he uncomfortably flirted with the interviewee.
Oh God, I remember that.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Did that really matter in the grand scheme of what? I think that was Fast 7. No one cared. Did it reflect the movie's values or the story it was telling? No. And did Vin Diesel, like, it's cringe, and people bring it up as like a funny thing that happened, but it's just not very it doesn't matter, and a lot of people, like, until you bring it up, a lot of people don't even know about it, and frankly a lot of younger people probably don't know about it until you bring it up, because they weren't there to see it at the time.
Yeah.
I remember, because I was, at the time following a lot of movie publications, and I'm not really a Fast and Furious person, but it's like, oh, like, you get when you're into movies, you watch a lot of promotional material for various movies and stuff. So I saw the interview and I remembered it, and then it brought every couple of years it gets brought up because it's the cringiest thing he's probably ever done. And I bet that's not even true. I mean, you go back to like the late 90s when he was like in his early 20s. I'm sure he did some cringy stuff back then too. The guy's a closeted nerd. He loves D&D and stuff. So
I love that he's the voice of Groot.
Yeah, no, I mean it's and not just the voice. He's also doing the mocap for Groot, and that includes Baby Groot. So
Baby Groot's hilarious.
Groot. But yeah, so I will. Maybe it's not as serious. Some people will say it's serious because he was sexually harassing the interviewer. She clearly was uncomfortable, but like it felt kind of more like stupid drunk guy hitting on a girl. And,
which I mean, that's not right either. But I will say though, in that case though, the backlash was a little bit more deserved because
more deserved, but also like again, it's just that's what this is in my opinion, because it's like you could say she's being insensitive, but in a few years, like that is what this is going to be for Blake Lively. She's going to go on to whatever she ends up doing. Maybe she'll star in the sequel if they make the sequel into a film. But this is just going to be some cringe that's brought up every few years whenever she is like a subject. Like, oh hey, remember the time when she said wear your florals to that domestic violence movie? Like, it's just going to be something that people talk about every few years when they remember that it happened. In my opinion, who knows? But is this career ruining? I don't think so. Her co-stars don't seem to be angry with her. Neither does the director. That's another thing I saw people like kind of speculating on stupidly when I didn't really I didn't see any evidence that was the case. So I think this is just internet mobs getting angry as well. As off-putting as I found it, I don't know if it was marching orders from the studio. And even if I find it off-putting, so what? Again, like let's say it was as tone-deaf as everyone's making it out to be. I don't really think the girl needs to be massacred just because she had a tone-deaf way of marketing the movie.
Now, I will say before we move on to our next topic, again, these are the opinions of two people who are males, and I can only speak for myself that I have not experienced domestic violence. But if you have a differing opinion, go ahead and share your comments with us down below. We'd love to hear if we're totally wrong on this take, if we're totally missing the point.
Genuinely interested.
Yeah, we
Absolutely.
are interested.
I'm not, as I said, I'm not
wrong.
really leaning either way. As I said, to me, the stuff that I've seen, I find off-putting. But as I just said, like, is that a reason to like end the woman's career? I don't think so. I think there have been people with far more dangerous things to say, far more tone-deaf takes, like there's genuinely like worse people actively working in Hollywood that probably shouldn't have the job they have. And for her to just, it just, even if I think it's a tone-deaf way of putting things, no, I don't think that she deserves to be crucified or burned at the stake. And like T brought up, it is very weird how women end up being kind of targeted for this sort of thing when... especially the author, I don't even know, the author I feel like she might have even said at some point that she'd lived through an experience. I don't know, but it's weird. But
I don't think it's like D'Angelo Wallace said in his thumbnail, Blake Lively's fast tracking or speed running the end of her career. I don't think it's that, but go on.
Well, going on, we're going to move on from some steaming hot tea, possibly, imagined tea, onto cold sewage runoff.
God.
We're talking, of course, about the phenomenon that was Jackass, the movie. So,
if I could play a boo sound right now, I would.
Yeah, so, and we'll get into, I am curious on your thoughts. So, we both watched this last night, me because I've just been busy, T probably because he's been terrified. But yeah, you messaged me right before I was about to start watching, and you're like, I hate you. And I don't know if that's like the playful, I hate you, or if like,
I was about to go on
This
whole
is
thing.
the
I
last
hate
episode
you.
of the show.
I cursed the day I ever met you. I cursed the day the universe wanted to bring you into existence.
Right?
No, but yeah, I was just like, you made me watch this.
Well, and so okay, let's get into so Jackass the movie. One thing I find kind of funny is that this is the only one where they had to specify the movie. Like I feel like more people think of Jackass as a movie franchise than a TV franchise, and that was planned. I'll get into that. But so Jackass: the movie was released October 25th, 2002. I honestly thought it was probably a summer movie, but it was years ago. So this had a budget of $5 million and it grossed worldwide $79 million.
Okay,
It was directed by, oh yeah, really, this was like one of the biggest movies of that year, which made critics really angry, which was kind of funny. So it was directed by Jeff Tremaine and it was written by Jeff Tremaine, Johnny Knoxville, and Spike Jonze, who some of you guys might know for a lot more like thought-provoking, like, you know, indie flicks like Being John Malkovich or Adaptation, or more recently Her. And that's kind of another funny thing I'll get into, because like it's almost like having like, oh, what's a good, you know who I could see if he were alive and young at the time being kind of the Spike Jonze of this production is Orson Welles.
Yeah,
I can see him.
Orson Welles is wild enough. I could see him being involved in this.
I could see him doing something like this. But so, okay, before I get into kind of, I will ask your opinion in a sec. I'm gonna set the stage for you all. So a lot of people listening, I would be surprised if a majority of listeners don't know what Jackass is. You know, it's been around for a long time. They don't make movies that frequently. It's usually every couple of years. But it is still so culturally relevant. If anyone plays that twangy little riff before the main, you know, that song existed before Jackass, but everyone just thinks of Jackass, like the skull and cross crutches. Like this is an American institution, for better or for worse. Like this was a huge thing, and it's still a huge thing. Every time a Jackass movie is released, it still does really well. Even to the point where Jackass Forever a few years ago released kind of still when COVID was going on. From everything I heard, ticket sales were still really good. Streaming views were really good. They added some new cast members because it was essentially the last time any of the original members were going to do it, because they're like approaching like 60 years old at this point. So they brought on some new blood, including a woman who is now a part of the crew. Eric Andre was joined on. But this, for at least T and I's childhood, I think our demographics, a lot of the people listening are our age. But if for some reason a Zoomer or a Gen Alpha are listening to the show for some reason, this was the boogeyman of, like, this was worse than a horror movie. Like, if this was like, do not show your kids this movie. Yeah. It will ruin them. And so the first time I saw this movie, fun fact about whiskey as a kid, I was kind of the goody two-shoes. I was a straight-A student. I was a Boy Scout. I was essentially Butters from South Park. You know, jeez. And like Butters from South Park, I was like friends with a lot of the bad kids, like the skater boys and stuff. A lot of my friends did like dirt biking on the weekends. They would, you know, shoot paintballs, like stuff, like a bunch of them. Like, my parents didn't get me a skateboard until I was basically in middle school, because they didn't want me to like get a concussion or knock my teeth out. And as a result, I'm really bad at skateboarding. But like, this was like the stuff that I was really into, but I was not allowed to do. Like, my parents were very strict on, like, I was not to watch like R-rated movies. You know, like, I played video games, but it was all, you know, like age appropriate stuff. Like, when I think I even mentioned this, I think I just mentioned this to T, but like, when I was a very young kid, I saw Diablo. I think I was like in kindergarten or first grade. Saw Diablo at Costco. I thought it was awesome looking. Like, oh my gosh, can we get this for the computer? And I was with my dad, and he's like, oh yeah, sure, whatever. Got home, mom saw it was rated M. Literally right after it was done booting up, it was like, no, you can't play this. Like, snatched from the clutches of my hands.
That
So I
sounds
didn't
like
get to
that
play
sounds like my older brother in Halo. Like the only time
seven.
he was only
Halo.
allowed to play that at my cousin's house.
I had to convince my parents that it was not that bad, which it isn't. It's the reasons why Halo was rated M are so stupid. But that was like a thing for years. I could not play Halo because it was rated M. I'd play it at friends' houses, and I understood that like Grand Theft Auto, I completely understood why my parents would not let me play that. But like Halo, anyway, so I was invited to a sleepover birthday party with one of my, friends who was had kind of laxer parents, and stuff, and it was like, once the parents go to sleep, we rented Jackass.
Oh my
So
God.
while it was like the normal hours of the night, we also were watching like The Fifth Element. There was like a foosball table, pizza, yada yada. Once it was like midnight, Jackass. And this was like, it felt like dirty. And especially like if you watch this movie, like I got that feeling even now just watching it last night. It felt like watching pornography with like a bunch of your friends, because it was just so, it's gross.
Oh my God. That's so weird that you say that, because I was watching it and I was like, I don't want people to know I'm watching this. I closed the curtains in my not my room, in my living room, because I'm like, I don't want my neighbors to know I'm watching this.
I don't really feel like embarrassed to be watching it. It just feels like I remember at the time, because like I was in 5th grade, by the way, when this came out, and I knew like this was the bad movie, and it just was everything about it was so weird, knowing that this was like #1 at the box office as a little kid, and just seeing like this very bare bones movie where people are like drinking urine and like, shoving toy cars up their butts and stuff. Like it literally
that's not how you spent your Saturdays.
No, not really. But like it's so funny. The jury's out on whether it ruined my brain or not, but it's just one of those things where like, because that's another thing too. Like I was in 5th grade, there were girls in my class who watched this movie. Like It was not just like a skater. Everyone saw this movie, whether you were old or not, or old enough to or not. And it's just such a very surreal thing to think about nowadays. And I always try and bring it up anytime like people are talking about kids seeing things on the internet they're not supposed to. Like parents are having a harder time cracking down on that kind of thing. So like, of course, kids are going to be looking up a bunch of stuff they're not looking up. And then, when Jackass 2 came out, I'll probably mention it a little bit in the review. In my opinion, that's actually the good one. Jackass 3, also good, but like kind of tame. Mostly they just kind of came up with ways of like implementing the 3D effect, which was fine. But it's just funny because like when Jackass 2 came out, it was like a very different feeling, because by that time, everyone was used to Jackass at that point. And also I was a teenager, so it was like my experience of seeing that was me sneaking into it with a bunch of my teenage friends. So It didn't have like it wasn't quite as the story isn't as exciting as I drew up this first one. But so having set the stage, like, so T, you had not seen, you knew about this like everybody, but you'd not seen this. You hate me. What did you think exactly?
I wouldn't even classify it as a movie. But for technical reasons, not for qualities. It was bizarre. It reminds me of, it's interesting too, because they were doing much stuff in this, and I'm like, this is like no different. I mean, it is a little bit with how far they go than like, some of these like YouTuber pranks in public. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and a lot of those
like
pranksters, because that's something I was thinking about. Like, it's still pretty bad, but I feel like 2016, 2017 was like the peak of like awful YouTube prank channels, and that was something I and other people were like bringing up is like, clearly, what we totally forgot. What are you drinking?
Okay, so I didn't want to drink anything after watching this. But with it being the next day, I decided to settle on a glass of iced tea, because I don't think there's anything with tea in the movie.
I see. Well, I'm going full dirt bag. I got a Voodoo Ranger Imperial IPA. I feel like beer is a very good stupid drink, and anyone can Google what Imperial or Voodoo Ranger looks like, but they got a skeleton mascot. He's got a gold tooth. And this one, he's wearing one of those Russian hats, and he's got kind of a fighter pilot sort. It looks like something. It's literally the hat Bam was wearing when he pranked his parents with the fireworks. So,
oh my god,
those looks like the sort of thing. Those are his parents, and I'll get into that. I have differing opinions on certain aspects of the Jackass franchise, but yeah, like part of the reason I wanted to do this also. Any longtime listeners to this show, we talk about we're the show from the unpretentious perspective. We take issue with people labeling things cinema or not cinema.
Yeah.
And so with this current pairing, we're calling it like Shameless September. I was like, let's watch something we think is trashy. I don't think you can get much trashier than Jackass. If anything, T, I went easy on you because I was considering Pink Flamingos, which, believe it or not, is worse than this.
Yeah, okay. Oh my god, it's worse? Jeez.
Let's just say...
I know about certain scenes in it with Divine things she eats.
Oh, yes. There's quite a few scenes like that. Also, it does sort of border on pornography for that one. But yeah, so... we were always talking about, like, real movies, sometimes very well-esteemed movies. So, like, let's actually... get into the nitty gritty of like, is this cinema? Is this a movie? Is this, what, like, does it deserve some kind of respect for being so popular with, a wide audience? Because at the end of the day, the populace, the public voted that this was good. And it's funny, I've got a couple of reviews keyed up, and on Rotten Tomatoes, you can even see critically, this is a 49%, audience score 75.
Okay, so 49% is higher than I thought it was going to be.
Some critics think that, like, there's some good reviews as well. It depends on which person you're talking to, but that is something that is brought up these days. It's more of a political argument. It's because critics are woke or whatever. But right. I do think it is worth discussing seriously, like, what was good or bad about this. So you didn't like it particularly. You kind of feel like it's not even a movie. I get where you're coming from. So
right, and history... I don't mean it from the, and I want to be clear, especially after you just said, well, we don't like people classifying what is and isn't cinema and all that sort of stuff. I mean it from the standpoint of, as somebody who I guess is chronically on YouTube, this feels like I literally just put on like creepy stuff all the time. This feels like one of those, top 50, mysteries. And it's just like an hour of just, a narrator just talking about different mysteries. Like, to me, this is more of like a compilation or like, a greatest hits tape feeling than like a film. Like, because I kind of knew sort of what Jackass was going into this. I thought they were going to take their pranking and sort of stuff and build a story around it. And there is no story, which is, to me, is why I'm just like, I want, is this truly a movie, or is this just like a compilation tape that was played on a big screen? That's basically what I meant, right? Not whether or not it's worthy of this.
In my opinion, and this would be great if you're listening to this on our YouTube channel, like, comment if you disagree. My opinion is this is the worst Jackass movie. I think I haven't even seen 4, but I bet it's better. But so what I've got in my notes here, what is Jackass? And I've broken it down to 3 essential types of bits in the movie. And this goes to the show, subsequent movies. There are 3 types of bits in the movie. There's stunts, there's pranks, and then there's gross out humor. And I've kind of listed those as what is best to worst. I'm not really into, watching people poop their pants and puke and all that sort of stuff. So I can find puking funny in some contexts, but like, that's just bottom of the barrel, and also like, that's where it also feels like dirty watching it on the big screen or with your friends or whatever. Like, when I say that in 5th grade watching it felt like watching pornography with a bunch of other dudes, it was stuff like Danger Aaron pissing on snow and then eating it.
Yes.
That stuff I still don't like as an adult. For stunts, I feel like those are just always good. Like, and frankly, that kind of gets into the origins of Jackass. So the stunts and the pranks, I feel like pranks is number 2 for me, because sometimes the pranks I find really off-putting, sometimes they're very funny. 2 pranks from the TV show I decided to list because I remember being really funny. One, they got Brad Pitt to be a guest on one episode of the show, where they just did a bit where he's standing in line in Pink's hot dogs on a Highland in Hollywood.
Yep.
And a van of like masked people just roll up and kidnap him. And like the bit was just kind of seeing how all these tourists react from, oh my God, it's Brad Pitt, to then just like watching him get kidnapped. Right. And I thought that was kind of funny. And then there was another bit, kind of a stunt, kind of a prank. It's they got a limo and they filled it with bees. And that was like the bit, was just they got in like tuxedos and they had to like, you know, like, oh my God, it's a limousine full of bees. But so Jeff Tremaine is the director, and he's essentially like the creative head of Dickhouse Productions. And part of the reason Jackass is the way that it is this is an evolution not out of cinema or cinematic history. This is essentially a skater boy movie. There was a very, very popular skateboarding magazine called Big Brother in the 90s, and it was like this very...
You just
like,
unlocked a core memory.
Oh, so you've heard of Big Brother magazine?
I've heard of Big Brother. I remember some of the... I guess at the time it would have been like kindergarten or first grade. I guess the ones you would consider the macho boys of the class, because it was the 90s and skateboarding was what the men did, would bring them to class.
It's funny. I never read Big Brother. I have, like, again, way back in my past. Here's a fun fact about whiskey. My dad eventually became a school teacher, but for like my early childhood, he was the owner and manager of a surf shop that did skateboards and skis and all that sort of stuff.
That explains your cadence, because I've kind of always thought you had sort of like a surfer guy, like what is it called? What do we call it? Drawl?
I get that all the time.
You have like a surfer guy drawl, but you're not like full on surfer guy sounding, but you have a drawl.
Everyone said that. Whenever I would travel out of state, people would say I have like a Californian accent. I don't know. I've had some people, like, when I've told them that, they think, what? Like, what are you talking about? You just talk normal. I don't know. The whole thing's ironic because my dad did not skateboard or surf. He skied. So it was kind of weird that he like opened a shop in the first place. But when I would visit him as like a little, toddler up to like, I forget when he became, I think it was like around second grade when he decided to go into teaching. But like really early, like visiting him at the store, there would just be all these like punk posters everywhere, like saw dudes like in mohawks and like all this other. So I don't know, that like, I always thought that was really cool even as a little kid. But so Jeff Tremaine, the director of Jackass, the founder of Dickhouse Productions, he was the editor of Big Brother magazine.
Okay.
And on top of that, Bam Margera, one of my least favorite Jackass members, and he's like a whole other, but so he was a professional skateboarder and an amateur filmmaker who was kind of blowing up in the skate video scene. So even though he's just like a member of Jackass, he was sort of a filmmaker in his own right. And his brother was the drummer of the rock band CKY, and he was active in making music videos for them. Bam Margera actually produced a really famous underground skate video called it was called Land Speed because it was to promote Land Speed products. But it had CKY music, and Bam like filmed and directed it. So that was part of the reason he was brought on as a member of Jackass. So like the thing about Jackass is you kind of have to approach it not from like a film scholar perspective. It's more of a skateboarding movie, even though it's not. And that's also like, I'm sure you noticed, like, what, Tony Hawk is in this movie? At one point he's like in a fat suit, like doing a bunch of tricks with them and stuff. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
Tony Hawk, like, yeah, he was a skateboarder, but he was always kind of like a professional athlete. He never really had he every once in a while, like I remember he was like on an episode of Punk'd, but he was the one being punked. So he was always very professional, and I think he's part of the reason skateboarding was seen as legitimate. Like he was a businessman. He got into the video games. Like you never really saw Tony Hawk lighting his farts on fire, you know? So
Right.
seeing him in this was also kind of like, what? Tony Hawk's in Jackass? But again, it's because of Jeff Tremaine and Bam Margera. Speaking and that too, like as I said, Bam Margera was a famous skateboarder back in the days of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Bam was one of the characters you could skate as. So that's kind of where it started. Basically, Jeff Tremaine and Johnny Knoxville were, friends. They knew of each other, and they had this idea of making like a TV show version of the Big Brother magazine. So they got in talks with Spike Jonze, and he would go on to be kind of this indie filmmaker, but at the time he was doing a lot of rock music videos, so also sort of in that grungy DIY filmmaker kind of scene. So makes sense why, and also a lot of the bands that he was making music videos for kind of were in the same sphere as this. So him and the two of them went around pitching this to a bunch of studios, and MTV, being how they were and kind of, having...
I love the way you put that, being how they were.
Well, like, I mean, even before this, they've had all sorts of, they did Beavis and Butthead, which was considered, like, trash. They did a really experimental sketch comedy show called The Idiot Box. Like, they were very, for their time, kind of forward-thinking. Yeah. They made a lot of content that would be adopted later on. And the entertainment president was a guy named Brian Graydon, and he's the one that greenlit Jackass at the time. And it was a hit. I don't know if you know this about Jackass lore, but famously, I remember finding this out when I saw it had like a DVD of the full series of Jackass at like Costco again. And I was like, wait, there's only like this many episodes? What's up with that? There was only one season of Jackass before this movie came out.
Really?
Right. So, and I was thinking like, well, did it bomb? Like how is that possible? The movie did crazy, well, the movie was already hyped up because of the show. So why did it only have one season? Well, I found out during my research for this review, it has nothing to do with it doing poorly. So there's only one season because of the backlash. So the thing is, like, they could have kept making it a TV show and they'd have to deal with parents trying to sue them for their stupid kids trying to copy things on the show despite there being a warning. But changing it into a film franchise was more profitable and gave them better protections. Plus they could go more crazy. It basically meant that they didn't have to censor anything. They could push stunts to the brink without having to worry about editing things for TV. And they're better protected from lawsuits because it's a lot harder to argue, oh, my son saw this and nearly killed himself on TV.
Well, why did you let him
oh,
go
my
see
son
it?
who I didn't want to see this movie snuck into a screening of this without my permission illegally. When you're at a movie theater and you're not allowed to see the movie unless you're a certain age or you have parental permission, what are you going to do? Like, there's only so much. We give you a warning at the beginning saying you shouldn't copy any of the stunts. So honestly, it was a smart decision because it is still going as a film franchise, and I think it did kind of cover them as far as, the lawsuits and the backlash from parents.
What that reminds me of, though, I don't know if you remember, there was a movie back in the 90s, and it was called, I thought it was Varsity Blues, I just looked it up, it's not. It was The Program, and it had a scene in it where these guys lay down in the middle of traffic and let cars around them.
No, they talked about it in Com 101.
Yeah, that's how I remember.
Stupid.
That's how I remember. But yeah, they took it out of the movie.
I think that was the stupidest argument they ever had in that class. Because the professor was kind of arguing like, oh yes, it was very irresponsible of that. Yeah, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Like it's one of the few things that kind of is like a conservative talking point that I agree with is like, do not treat people like they're babies. Once you're a certain age, unless like you have like a learning disability or something, like you're not gonna like if I see a movie where someone jumps off a bridge, I'm not gonna go out and jump off a bridge because I saw it in a movie. And I feel like once you start treating people that way, like it's just at one point does anyone have their own agency? And I feel like some episode of our podcast years ago I brought this up, but my opinion hasn't changed.
I mean, to be fair, in that case, there were deaths that were a direct result of people copying the scene. So
okay.
Well, I'm not saying that.
No. And I know you're not. Like, I'm just again, okay. Like, there were copycat gangsters of like various crime movies that came out.
But what's interesting about that, though, is that it was not restored for any home releases.
That is interesting. And again, like I haven't seen that movie. Like I
haven't either.
I am vehemently against the idea that like you have some kind of responsibility to not put something in your movie just because someone might copy it. That is utterly idiotic in my opinion. And again, like if you're going to do that, then we shouldn't put anything in any movie because it might give people we shouldn't have any crime in movies then. It might give people the idea that they should be criminals. It's like at one point do you give any credit to the agency of the people watching the movie? With things like this, like I am gonna say you should have a warning. People are stupid. If someone died from like something they saw in Jackass trying to copy it, like even without the warning, I would say that person's an idiot.
Yeah.
But I do think just to cover themselves, and also like, I'm sure again, like any Jackass fans can agree with me or not. I think the warning is iconic. It's part of like genuinely like seeing this in the theater. The 2 times I did, the warning is when people started cheering. Like, it's like so I think it's a good thing. It's a good reminder to the few idiots watching the movie or young children who shouldn't be watching the movie that it's not, but it's also like iconic.
Well, what's interesting about that is, like you said, it is iconic. I have never seen any of the Jackass, and so for some reason, I'm sure I've seen it parodied somewhere or something.
Oh yeah.
But like, I was like, this warning for whatever reason is super nostalgic. It's very much in the vein of like when Law and Order starts, and it's just like in the criminal justice system.
Well, they aren't the only ones.
It's very much in that vein.
Yeah, they aren't the only ones to do it. In fact, I mentioned South Park earlier when I said I was basically Butters from South Park. But South Park premiered in '96, 4 years before Jackass, and they have a warning at the beginning of their show, not because of any stunts or anything, but because it is a very, very R-rated cartoon, and so it's kind of like a hey, like I could read it out or whatever, but like it's the same deal. It's like we're not trying to, it's this whole line of thing like don't copy anything. The language is abhorrent. The 90s, this is meant to be offensive.
The 90s were an interesting time in television. I'd almost kind of say it was sort of a Wild West situation.
It's the extreme decade. It goes in every same thing with music. When you think of music from the 90s, that's where literally, I've talked about before. I'm a bit of a metalhead. That's when death metal was invented. In comics, that's where you had villains like, I guess it was technically the 80s, but you still had, in Batman, you had characters like Victor Zsasz, and you had Venom and Spider-Man, and you had, like, it was all, definitely Carnage was from the 90s. So you had, like, in every aspect of culture and entertainment, it was all about extreme. Everything's extreme.
Right, yeah, there was Jackass, this whole thing about extreme. I remember, for some reason, I even have, like, a memory of wasn't there like a show on like Fox called like When Animals Attack or something?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of shows like that. There was doing my research, there was an article talking about Jackass I was reading, trying to get some of this info, and the article compared Jackass to like an R-rated America's Funniest Home Videos. And that's kind of a funny and apt description of it, because that at the end of the day, you're laughing at the same kind of thing. It's just one's a lot more vulgar than the other. Like, you're watching with America's Funniest Home Videos, you're laughing at a kid in a softball game getting hit in the face with the ball, whereas in Jackass, you're laughing at a bunch of dudes filled with a limo full of bees riding around. So you're laughing at them getting hurt regardless, but one's a little bit racier than the other.
So what's interesting to me about this is, again, I'm talking about, once again, the layout. Before I want to I had some of my opinions on like some of the pranks and stuff in it too, but
let's get into that, because as I said, in my opinion, I think the stunts are like the one thing you can't, like, it's great in my opinion. Some of the stunts might be a little like underwhelming. I think the bit at the very, very end where Johnny Knoxville got launched into the water was kind of meh. But in general, I feel like the stunts are like, everybody can appreciate those. They're not disgusting. They usually don't involve like any serious like injury or anything. Like sometimes people fall, but like the stunts are usually pretty spectacular. The pranks are where it gets a little dodgy for me, because sometimes they're funny and sometimes they're not. And I think, go into it. Which ones did you like? Which ones did you not? Because I definitely did not like some of the pranks. I didn't when I was a kid, and I still don't.
So like you said, I think the thing that was most interesting and held my attention the most was when they were doing stunts. And when I mean stunts, I mean like, what did they do? There was one where this was not my favorite stunt, but it's just the first one that pops my attention, where he was trying to tightrope walk above crocodiles.
Yup.
Like, I mean, obviously that was not going to work at all.
Fun fact, though. So
another
kind
of in the water,
right? Well, yeah, it's the ones that I liked, and it's funny. They all part of what's cool about Jackass is there's a bunch of cast members, right? And they all kind of approach this a different way. They all have different backgrounds. Like I mentioned, Bam was a skater and a filmmaker, so he brought that. He also was, his brother was a musician, so him and his best friend Ryan Dunn, the guy with the toy car up his butt, like they were childhood best friends, and they came from kind of that end of things. Johnny Knoxville was a struggling, I don't want to say struggling, he did get like parts, but he was like a Hollywood actor. He was like the most famous out of all of them, which is why he was the host. And also, he was like friends with Jeff Tremaine, so that's always why it's like, I'm Johnny Knoxville, welcome to Jackass. He was the host essentially of Jackass. And then you had Steve-O, and Steve-O was the tightrope walker guy. Do you know much about Steve-O? I know he's kind of still in the public eye now, but like, do you know anything about him?
I tried looking up some of these guys. I couldn't catch what all their names were. And so this is okay.
My favorite Jackass guys are Knoxville, Pontius, and Steve-O. Steve-O's backstory is really interesting. I actually find it funny he can't tightrope walk. So he actually comes from a really wealthy family, but he has had a history of substance abuse problems since he was like 10 years old.
Is he the one that said he would be like disinherited or something?
Yup. Okay. So he, like, I don't know what his dad does, but super wealthy. So he ended up, like, I don't even know if he finished high school. He might have. I think he was even, like, forced to go to, like, a prep school or whatever, but he was always, he was a bad kid. He was always on drugs or drinking. He barely got through school. So when it was time to go to college, he went to clown school. Genuinely. Like, Steve-O is a professional clown. So that's kind of the funny thing about him, is he is sort of one of the better members because he does have a lot of circus talents. Obviously not tightrope walking. I find that funny. But like he's done stuff in later movies, and even in this, like he was kind of the one willing to do some of the more dangerous things like tightrope walk over the crocodiles. But Steve-O's like the one who's willing to do some really crazy stuff. Speaking of how I think Jackass 2 is the better film, there's a bit in that one where if you thought it was thrilling watching him do the tightrope walk, in Jackass 2, he sticks a fishhook through his cheek and then jumps into shark-infested waters.
Oh my god.
right? So up in the ante. But yeah, so Steve-O, ever since then, like, it got to a point where he was really bad. You can look up the MTV documentary on YouTube, but he was really badly addicted to nitrous. And it got to a point where, like, he turned a corner, and now he is 100% sober for over a decade. He's an animal activist. I remember one of the years I was living in LA, he climbed something. I forget if I think it was a billboard, but he was like trying to stop like the whaling industry or something. And he also has a podcast right now where he, you know, has like a van, travels around, and he interviews people, and he's had quite a few good like interviews with, you know, the Jackass guys. But he's another one where, like, I feel like his background kind of lended legitimacy to the show. Famously, the first ever episode of Jackass actually involves a lot of the casting tapes that the guys sent in, because while they were coming up with Jackass, they were casting it. Like, Knoxville was basically one of the creators of Jackass, but they needed guys. So it's like, oh, there's this kid from Pennsylvania, Bam Margera. He's like a skater. He's a filmmaker too. Like, we could add him. Okay, we'll bring him on. But they actually had an open casting where if you filmed yourself doing something crazy, like, you could be one of the Jackass guys. And Steve-O's one of those people. Fresh out of clown college, his casting tape was used in the first episode of the show. He swallows a live goldfish and then pukes it out back into a glass of water, and it's fine.
I think I've seen that parodied somewhere. That must be like an iconic thing or something.
It's iconic because, well, and it's what got him the role. I mean, like,
right.
If you see someone do that and you're doing like a stunt prank show, it's like, that's kind of comes from his circus background. That's the sort of stunt you would probably see in a circus. And thankfully the goldfish was fine. But that's the interesting thing too. Like, and some of it is like some kind of like dated comedy. Like, obviously Preston Lacey was like involved. Oh, we need like a funny fat guy, and oh, we need a short person. Let's get Wee Man. You know, but a lot of them. Chris Pontius, I believe he was like a musician. Pontius, like, he's one of my favorites. I just like his personality. I think he's really funny. But his whole shtick, if you didn't notice, is he's very okay getting naked in front of people. He was Party Boy.
Yeah, he's the one that would just show up places and be like, I need to party right now, and they take all his clothes
off. He's one of my favorites. I think he's got a funny personality, but he like, that's kind of his thing, is like, he's very cool getting naked in front of people. That's his hidden skill. But that was the other kind of interesting thing about Jackass, is like, it was sort of a collaborative thing. Like, all of these people were good at different things, and a lot of it was disgusting too. Like, I know Dave England, he was the one who pooped in the hardware store, and that's something like,
I fast forwarded through that. I was like, there's some stuff I don't need to see. Like, the gross out stuff, I did need it. People started vomiting, I'm skipping forward. I don't need to watch that.
Right.
Also, I would have liked a warning, because I sat down to eat while I was watching this.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that. And that's as I said, my least favorite stuff's the gross out stuff. I feel like in the later movies, they still had gross out stuff, but it was at least more, it was almost like more intense to the point where it was interesting. Like, there's a part in Jackass 2 where they drink horse semen. So, like, you know, still gross, but like, at least.
And we're done with the tea.
Right?
So basically, they do gross stuff. Let's just leave it at that. They do nasty things. The stuff that I found interesting, like you said, for the most part, was the stunts. The things I didn't like were the gross out humor. And this is probably just a carryover from YouTube pranksters. I hated pranks where people who were not involved in the show were like the targets or whatever. I mean, I know they sign a waiver after the fact, obviously not before, because their reactions are always genuine.
And they always, so opening bit of the movie, rental car demolition derby, they bought the car.
Well, no, I figured they would, but that was after the fact, so they could get the
absolutely.
That just bugs me. Like, what if the guy? I mean, I'm not trying to be this person, but like, what if the guy like had a heart attack and died? You know,
right? And That's the thing. It kind of depends. That one I'm okay with because they reimbursed them, and that's the
Yeah.
whole reason they were mad. Uh, and the bits parts of it actually made me laugh. It was not, and it was always Knoxville. It was the same thing when he was pretending to be an old man shoplifting. There was something just funny to me about how, well, what are you talking about? Like, I've got nothing in my jacket. The same way with the rental car thing. He's like, well, obviously I'm not going to pay for it. And I think part of it is like, there are people like that, like having worked retail,
or it's just like the audacity,
knowing he's not actually going to do that, and they're going to reimburse them, and this is just a bit. There was something about that just made me laugh a lot harder than when I was a kid. And I think part of it was just the audacity of someone being that stupid. like the old man shoplifting was another one where like you can see how much stuff he's got in the. What are you talking about? I came in here like this. Like I don't know. There was something just there was a simplicity about it.
To be fair, he did. I mean, not to be fair. What's interesting about the shoplifting sequence, and this to me, I'm like, this could have gone a very different direction. Like there are literally shop owners like that
who pull a gun,
who will pull a gun on you. I'm like, he's like just lucky this guy just didn't do that.
The one bit that I was laughing wildly at, I remember I thought it was funny as a kid too, but I just thought it was so funny, was the air horn with the golfers. Part of it, partly just because of how angry they got. Like, that's one of those things where, yes, that's annoying and obnoxious, but also it's a game. Like, you don't, like, people who take games seriously annoy me anyway. That was a fun fact I saw doing research for this. Apparently, those golfers almost didn't sign the release. They were so angry, so the cast and crew had to take them out for, like, drinks and like wine and dine them to get them to sign the form.
Okay, see, love that backstory. See, I kind of wish, like, and I know why they didn't, because it kind of takes away the illusion and the humor. I kind of wish they'd put like these like funny backstories, like just in a quick blurb at the end of the segment.
They've done. I don't know. Did you stay for the end credits, like when they were showing like all the extra stuff and all that, or did you? Just
okay, I will say I did. I was just like, thank God I'm done.
Okay, because sometimes they do. I didn't see any last night when I was watching this, but I remember in like the later Jackass 2 and 3 they did cut in some behind the scenes stuff with them, like people that they were pranking laughing afterwards and stuff. So they did do a little bit of that in the later movies. But you missed it. There's a bit at the very, very end after the credits are done where Rip Torn is like, next will be Son of Jackass, and then it like cuts to 2063 and all the cast are in like old men makeup, and it's just them like getting blown up and run over by buses, and they had a bunch of special effects make it look like it was all real and stuff. So you missed it. But
I will say, so the thing about the stunt ones is they were the most interesting. I would not say there was, I can't remember which one. There was one segment that I actually laughed at. I can't remember what it is now, but the ones where they did the stunts and they're literally, that's one of the reasons kind of why I like Impractical Jokers, because you introduced me to that.
Yep.
Is the joke is always on them. It's not really like to embarrass or ruin the day of somebody else. It's always like they embarrass themselves. I mean, they talk to people and say weird things to them, but again, it's the embarrassment and stuff's always. That's kind of why I've liked Impractical Jokers. But so that's why I thought like, even I wouldn't really call them like entertaining, but that's a taste thing. That's not a problem with Jackass. That's a personal thing. I wouldn't call them entertaining. They were the most interesting because it's kind of like when, I don't know if you were one, because the only people that really were at stake were them. The one that I thought was okay. I did think this one was interesting. I didn't laugh out loud, but I thought it was funny because when he goes to that place and like that guy just like plugs his like self-defense or gun business or whatever it was.
Oh yeah.
I was just, and then he just shoots one of the guys on the show, and the guy's just like laying there. It was kind of like, ha, like you got what you deserve. It's kind of, it's my reaction to a lot of these things where, I don't know if you remember this commercial from like, I don't know, maybe it was like 5-10 years ago. I'm trying to remember when it was, but it was for Butterfingers. and these two guys in like an office setting were like really competitive over their butterfingers and were like stapling each other to the wall to keep them from eating each other's butterfingers. And this girl just looks over at them and she goes, "You guys are idiots." And I'm like, that's literally was my reaction to a lot of this sort of stuff. Like I said, the stunts were harmless, I guess, in general. I mean, they provide harm, but they're harmless to the general public because it's just these people being stupid to themselves.
Well, and it's also at the core. Again, this started as like a skateboard magazine show, so like that I feel like is kind of, you know, a lot of people remember the pranks more, but I feel like that is at the essence of what Jackass was supposed to be. And I feel like that kind of comes through in all of the movies and even the show, is like, you know, let's see some crazy, you know, skateboarding or like some weird stunt or something. You know, let's things that people would not be courageous enough to do or see someone else do. Like that's the stuff I feel like is just genuinely inoffensive. It might be hard to watch if it's a little bit dangerous, but I don't think that's the sort of thing I feel like you could show Midwestern moms who are offended at this movie and they wouldn't think it's that bad, which like, is fine because the later stuff is what's bad. The stunts or the pranks that really rub me the wrong way, again with different ones. So for instance, like Dave England pooping in the toilet.
Yeah.
Again, so obviously they bought the toilet. That one bothers me more than the demolition car or demolition derby rental car thing, because he still pooped in front of a bunch of people. Like, yes, they probably bought the toilet and stuff, but like that worker had to deal with that crap literally that day. Like that one, I can't remember if I thought it was funny as a kid, but as an adult, that one I didn't think was very funny. Like, again, I know the toilet's not going to be there. They bought it. They probably destroyed it because no one wants to touch Dave England's turd. But that rubbed me the wrong way. And the ones that I've hated always, even as a kid, and I feel like even my friends, you know, the ones who were like, you know, getting into trouble and stuff, I don't even think they liked these, as far as I know. The bits where Bam was pranking his parents, I hated those. I still hate those.
Right, I was like, does this guy hate his parents? Like, what is wrong?
Well, and they're so stupid too. Like the one that like was actually parodied on Family Guy, it's not even a prank. Like the bit where his father is just like taking a crap and he just runs in and starts like slapping him. It's like, what even is this? This isn't even a prank. There's like, at least when you're waking him up with fireworks, there's like an element of absurdity to that. But like at that point, you're just like hitting your dad while he's taking a crap.
Well, the part that's awkward about that is just, you have to think about this. Not only that happened, but then his dad still signed the waiver. So,
well, his dad, like his parents were kind of they're interesting because I always thought, like, why are his parents like allowing him to do this? You know, both of their sons ended up being kind of like rich and famous. Bam because of his skateboarding and from Jackass, and their other son because he was a drummer in a rock band. But both of them were very like hard rock types when they were younger. Like they were into like Motley Crue and stuff. Like I learned that. Speaking of which, like, so Tremaine after Jackass, like Dickhouse is still going strong. He did a bunch of spin-off shows, Viva La Bam, which was a reality show about Bam Margera's life, you know, his parents, all that stuff. My personal favorite show, Wild Boys, which was Steve-O and Chris Pontius basically doing like Jackass but educational. Do you remember the bit in the movie where they went into the ocean and were stroking the sea cucumbers because it looked like they were jerking off?
Yes, I was like, what are they doing? Because that was kind of like, I will admit, at some point watching this, I started doing a crossword puzzle because I was just, it's great as passive entertainment.
Yeah.
So, I didn't know what they were doing. I'm like, what are these people doing? It was kind of more, not really a prank, more of like a transition scene, I think. Because the next thing it went to was them in the ocean with the shrimp in their pants.
Yep, so both of those, that is essentially what Wild Boys was. It was them doing stupid stuff, but it was usually educational. I remember one bit in Wild Boys, they had a little, you know, macaque, the type of monkey, and they were just saying a bunch of facts about the macaque, but like the whole joke was that it sounds like they're saying my cock in a funny voice.
Oh, God.
And it's like that, and it's like that's what Wild Boys was. Like it was Jackass, but slightly more respectful and also educational. They were going to foreign countries. They were legitimately teaching you. Like another bit from Wild Boys. In Cambodia, there are these indigenous people that live in longhouses, and for certain celebrations, I believe it's like I think it's just a holiday, like it's a day out of the year. But they do this insane binge drinking. I know that Anthony Bourdain actually covered the same thing in his show, but there you go. Like that was a bit in Wild Boys, and like basically it's just Steve-O and Pontius drinking to the point of them being like super drunk, but you're learning something about this tribe in Cambodia. So stuff like that. I liked it because I like educational stuff, and I also like stupid humor. So it was kind of like that nice crossroads for me, and it was also two of my favorite Jackass guys. I also bet that that's where Steve-O got his affinity for animals, because a lot of the stuff in Wild Boys was like animal stuff. Some dangerous ones too. I remember there was one where they like wore a meat suit and walked through a bunch of lions, if I remember correctly. It was a cool show. It was Jackass, but educational, if that makes any sense.
No, no, it does. It was interesting. So, really, because I wanted to kind of bring up sort of a comparison and get your take for this. But I think my favorite part though was with the car in the butt stunt. Not the prank, but they're with this doctor, and keep in mind this is like the 90s. And this doctor at the time is like, and he's older. He's like still super inclusive, and he's like your girlfriends, your boyfriends, your whatever. And then
do not tell them.
Do not tell them. This guy knows, and that's too much. Well, and then when he's talking on Spanish on the phone, I thought that was funny too, because they translate it. So he basically tells them he was at this frat party and he passed out, and
they were having sex with each other.
I know, that's what he says. I'm like, did they cut something out? Like, or is he just basically being like, yeah, this is probably what happened?
I know there was some editing around that scene, because there was like a goof that they talked about on IMDb when I was doing my research, where when they walk in, you see that the x-ray of the car in his butt's already behind him. So there's a little bit of cutting going on, because that was not like staged. That's like just cut out of time. So there is a little bit of like editing around.
Well, they may have reshot. They may have reshot the intro, the walking in. That's fine.
Yeah.
So there's that. But there's interesting, because I looked this up because you were mentioning people's names. I looked them up. So Toy Car Guy is actually dead.
Yeah. So I mentioned it's not a secret. That was kind of the other thing about Jackass 3, was that was the last time the entire cast was together. So Ryan Dunn, as I said, Bam and him were childhood friends, and he had a car accident right like a month or less after Jackass 3 came out. It was like a big deal, big celebrity death, and it wrecked Bam. He already had kind of a drinking problem, but it spiraled. So Bam Margera was not in Jackass 4. He has been in a serious downward spiral for the last like decade and a half. Basically, ever since his best friend died. It ruined his marriage. He does not talk to his family anymore, and pretty much the entire cast of Jackass. Steve-O has repeatedly tried to get him clean because of his own demons, which he fought off, but Bam has just been...
what's interesting about that, well, not interesting, but what's sad about that is this was caused by Ryan's own drinking problem. Like, I know they phrased it as a car accident. It was I mean, it technically was. It was a drunk driving accident. Like, this dude was like plastered and was going like 130 miles an hour, and then not only killed himself, but his one of the production assistants from Jackass 2.
Yep, it's a thing. A bunch of them had issues with that, and a lot of them, pretty much like the main ones, have gotten over it. They're all like older guys now, but it's still sad nonetheless. Like, I'm not gonna. I hate drunk drivers, so I'm not going to like say, oh, he was like this. It's just sad because like I did like Ryan Dunn. It's funny. I really dislike Bam, but I liked Ryan Dunn. Like in the movies, he had some funny bits. I actually thought his finale prank with the toy car was pretty funny.
That's the only one I remember him being in. Is what's hilarious to me.
Yeah, and that was so the other thing I was going to get into. Like I keep bringing up, Jackass 2 was just better. The finale in Jackass 2, I just got to describe this stunt to you because there's like layers to it. So Danger Aaron, the guy who ate the snow cone, so he believed he was going to prank a cab driver by dressing up like a terrorist going to the airport. Yes, I hear you say, that's really racist. Well, here's the thing, T. The prank was actually on Danger Aaron. So the cab driver was an actor that they hired. It was the same actor from Broken Lizard, if you've ever seen... at least I'm pretty sure it was him, but if you've ever seen Super Troopers, it was one of the actors from that. Brown-skinned guy, obviously, because he's a cab driver. But so the joke was going to be that the cab driver pulls a gun on him and puts him in the trunk. Like,
oh my God.
And then the icing on the cake. So obviously Aaron's terrorist costume was going to be very racially insensitive. They were going to give him brown face. But for the icing on the cake of this being a prank on Aaron, for his fake beard, the entire cast and crew shaved off all of their pubes to glue onto his face.
Ew. Ew.
So that's the finale prank of Jackass 2, and I think that was a far higher high to go out on. The toy car was definitely one of the better ones for this movie, but I feel like, I don't know, like there was never like an escalation to the point where this felt like an ending. It just kind of, well, that's it, everybody. I feel like in general with the later Jackass movies, part of the reason I like them is that they actually were able to put more money into them and thus more thought. I showed you the ending of Jackass 2. So after that cab sketch, we go into the musical number I showed you from the end of Jackass 2. And as you can see, quite a much more elaborate and cool sort of set piece they did with the musical number and all of the dancing and all of that. And I feel like that's just sort of the later Jackass films in a nutshell. Like they were actually, like, yes, it's funny that the third one was in 3D, but they had the same camera as like Avatar, and they actually put thought into like what's some cool stuff we could do that would utilize the 3D, sometimes for the gross and sometimes for like good like stunt ideas and things like that.
Right.
And that was the thing. Like we got off on multiple tangents, but the last two things that Dick House has done of note, they did Loiter Squad on Adult Swim, which helped launch the career of a bunch of people, including Tyler, the Creator. At the time, it was kind of marketed as like Black Jackass, but I don't think that's really comparable. It was sort of different. And then famously, I'm sure you remember this, but Bad Grandpa, Jackass Presents Bad Grandpa.
Yes, I remember that.
Won an Academy Award for Best Makeup, and it's the same makeup you were seeing in this movie, the old guy makeup. And that, you said you didn't like how this didn't have a story. Yeah. That movie's kind of interesting because it is a scripted story with Jackass pranks for comic set pieces. So it's like a road trip movie of this old man, like I guess it's his grandson. I saw it a while ago, but like, so he's taking him across the country, but then they'll stop at different places and basically prank whoever is there. Like they think he's a real old man with his grandson. And so, I don't know, they'll show him like drinking or like letting the kids smoke or something and like, you know, just getting reactions from people. But just based on you saying like you would have liked it better if there was a story, maybe you'd like that movie better. But also was at the time.
I thought Bad Grandpa had what's his face in it.
Different movie.
Okay.
There are two Bad Grandpas. There's the Academy Award winning one, and then there's the embarrassing one where I know
Robert De Niro, right?
Robert De Niro gets sexy with Aubrey Plaza. There's that one too. So
right.
different movies, but anyway. So that's like what Dickhouse was up to then. But yeah, it's an interesting period in history. I can't say that I hate this. Maybe it's just because I kind of grew up with it. And it's also really interesting. Like, there's a nostalgic kind of feeling with it too. Going back to Ryan Dunn's death and stuff, it's a little bittersweet seeing where a lot of the guys have ended up after this. Many of them are doing just fine. Johnny Knoxville, he does not do stunts anymore after decades and decades of abusing his body. But
I can only imagine.
Oh, as I said, this wasn't even the final bit. And I forgot to talk about this too, but I was talking earlier about how all of the guys kind of approached this project with a different mindset. Other reason I like Johnny Knoxville is his view on it was very, like, he was the only like Hollywood actor, and he kind of had a vision of himself being like a Buster Keaton doing his own stunts. And a lot of the stunts he had in his mind were very Looney Tunes-esque. He self-admitted. One of his stunts, which I thought was one of the better ones in this movie, was rocket skates.
Yeah.
Very Looney Tunes. And that's another, like, it was on the poster for Jackass too, but there's a bit where they built a giant rocket for him to cling onto as if he was like Wile E. Coyote or something like that. So a lot of his stunts were much more kind of Looney Tunes inspired, or like Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd inspired. And I kind of like that about him. Like, he's not so much about like the gross stuff, or even like the skateboarding. Like, he wasn't a professional skateboarder, but I kind of liked that angle he had on it.
Oh yeah,
but
yeah.
He's gone on to do fine things. Like, he actually acted in a bunch of movies. I don't know if you remember that Dukes of Hazzard movie with Jessica Simpson, but he was one of the Dukes in that. Bam, unfortunately, is just probably going to die any day. Even though I don't like him very much, I do hope he turns the corner with that. Steve-O's doing great. Pontius, I think, is doing great. I don't think he ever really blew up, got famous from anything else. And that too, like, Jackass 4, years and years after Jackass 3, still did pretty good just 2 years ago. And they got new people involved, so curious to see what the next movie will be like. I don't think it'll be any of the old cast.
Yeah.
And I guess, like, before getting into our scores, the last thing I will say, like, so we started off, what is cinema? Does something deserve to be labeled not cinema? This is just kind of a collection of various stunts and pranks and gross things. Like, what makes
the comparison I was gonna make, and I think this goes into what you're saying, is, I don't know if you remember this, but in the late 80s, early 90s, there was, again, and it did not get a theatrical release, but there was a series of films that were passed around at video stores called Faces of Death. I don't know if you know about this whole thing.
I know about it, but it wasn't. It was originally like something that they showed at traffic school.
Well, Faces of Death is just a collection of odd or off-putting, usually involving death or murder or something, of or dismemberment of people. Faces of Death was supposed to be all real. It was basically like this. It was just a collection like this. There was not like anything else. There's another one called Traces of Death, which is basically the same thing, except some of the stuff in Faces of Death was staged, and Traces of Death is supposed to be all real. And I have seen some of this because a friend and I went to the Museum of Death in LA, and they had a whole room where they were just kind of playing that on a loop. And it's pretty disturbing. But the point being, with, again, the way it's structured, where it's just sort of a, hour and a half, 2 hour, whatever, montage of just different clips, one after the other, with kind of a very loose sort of connection of they're all gory or dismembery things. When the other one, of course, being, with Jackass being pranks and things like that. Would you classify Faces of Death as a movie?
So, where I consider this cinematic is not in the movie itself. I've talked about how there's sort of a great one of the things people don't talk about when they talk about seeing a movie in the theater is like the vibe you get in the theater. I've mentioned
Right.
this before with like horror movies and how people can get like really jazzed about something or excited. You really saw it during Marvel event or Avengers Endgame or Infinity War. Those were like events. And as silly as it might be, whether it be me secretly watching this at a birthday party or sneaking into this as a teenager or seeing it legitimately as a young adult, every time I saw this movie, there was a communal sort of aspect to it.
Okay.
Whether it was us kids like, ooh, this is, we're not supposed to be watching this, with all the lights off in our sleeping bags, or when I'm going to the movie theater, either as a teenager or an adult, and when that warning comes up, everyone just cheers. And Jackass 2, I remember, was like a packed house. Like every time I saw it, it was just crowded. And people would react when something gross was happening. You'd hear girls being like, "Oh my god," like it's that to me was what made the Jackass franchise cinematic.
Okay.
Not so much the actual movie, but like the fact that it was like an event that you almost went to see as a dare, because everyone saw it, and some people because they legitimately found it funny, some people like as I said, like a dare, or like even adults. Like I mentioned how like girls in my 5th grade class had seen it. Like there's almost like a naughtiness to going to see like this trashy movie. So there was this communal aspect to it that I feel like was, even though it's silly to compare it to an Avengers movie, it was like the same kind of vibe. So that's
Right. I
where
can
I
see
would
that.
say it is quote unquote cinema. Watching this alone at home drinking is sad, and you shouldn't do that. And that was also probably a demented person who actually finds like everything about it really funny. But going out to see this with like friends, or oh man, like having some friends over and like, oh, I rented Jackass 2, how stupid is this, that's kind of what makes it fun.
Yeah.
Just in a vacuum it's not very good, but just sort of indulging in this awful trash is sort of fun when you're doing it with your friends.
See, when you put it like that, it's really interesting because like you said, nobody really talks about the community aspect of movies and theaters and everything sort of like that. And so I do think that, like you said, that's what would separate it from something like Traces or Faces of Death is. Whereas I feel like this is more meant to kind of, like you said, to bring people together. It's meant to be watched with people. It's meant to be, you know, something kind of like that. Like you said, is cinematic experience being at the cinema. Whereas like something like Faces or Traces, that's really kind of more from what I have heard is people would get this and like have it on in the background at like, weird grungy parties. Or, you'd get your 3 friends together and be like, ooh, look, creepy dead people. It wasn't like really
Yeah,
something that was kind of meant to bring together and inspire large reactions. So that's actually very
absolutely.
interesting. When you bring that together, would you talk about it from that perspective? It really sort of, it's ironically, it elevates the film a little bit. Like you may not like what's
As
going on or vibe or think it's funny because that's all subjective. But like I argued with the Avengers film, which I'm also not a super fan of, but again, just for interest's sake, not because I don't think it's real cinema, it's really what it does and how the audience interacts with it that really sort of
exactly.
make it.
And as disturbing as it might sound, for better or for worse, this is a franchise I grew up with, and a lot of people grew up with. And it wasn't quite as packed when I saw Jackass 3, but it was a pretty sizable crowd. And I guarantee a lot of those people probably were the same as me watching it secretly when they were in 5th grade. And they probably were having a lot of the same feelings I was having, where it's like, whoa, it's really weird that I don't have to sneak into this theater or whatever. Like I think I was like 19 or 20 when Jackass 3 came out, and and the fact it was in 3D was kind of what made it funny. But it's like, I don't know, it was weird because it was almost like three different phases of life seeing this same trashy franchise. But yeah, I did plan on reading some reviews, but I don't even think we really need to get into it as much. I'm just going to read my favorite one once I find it here. So, way back, and for some reason this is in 2007. I don't know why it's so much later after the film, but Peter Travers from Rolling Stone said about Jackass: the movie, "It's not exactly stupid. Cynical might be a better word." I think that's pretty harsh, but at least it is a little bit more nuanced than just calling it stupid. And I don't think he's necessarily wrong. So a lot of people, I've been defending Jackass a bit, but I do think I have to be fair in my rating. I'm not going to give this a 3.5. I'm not going to give this a 3. I'm not even going to give this a 2. I am going to be a little mean because I do think that as important of a film as this is, it's not very good. And I said it already. I think the later Jackass films did a better job, partly because they had more money and partly because they actually put some more artistry into the stuff. Like, that musical number I sent you. I think that's cool that was in Jackass 2. So, despite me being a bit of a defender of this movie, I'm going to give it a 1.5. A lot of it has not aged well. I was actually kind of nervous with us watching this. I could not remember that much about it, but I was very relieved after seeing it that no one said any racial or homophobic slurs, because that's the sort of thing I could have seen Bam maybe doing. Yeah. So, some stuff, like, thankfully it's aged better than I thought it has, but a lot of it hasn't aged well. A lot of it is too gross. Like, again, it's still got that icky feeling of kind of feeling like you're watching pornography. Yeah. In a group setting, it works, but it's just not really fun to watch. And I feel like in the later films, they got the secret recipe with how to make it actually enjoyable, whereas this just kind of felt like a bunch of half-assed ideas thrown together. So 1.5 out of 4. Sorry, guys, but I think anyone who grew up with this franchise is probably going to agree with me. We always talk about, commenting if you're listening to this on YouTube. Genuinely care what you have to say, so feel free to leave a comment. What do you think, T?
So I'm going to go ahead, and I was originally going to go with 1. I'm bumping it up to 1.5 after our discussion about audience and the way that people interact with this film. Even though you said it wasn't the best of the franchise, I still feel like it's 1. It's the first one. Fans of the franchise will probably know things about this movie by heart, things like that. It has to do with the audience aspect that you brought up about this. That being said, like you said, it's weird to watch by yourself. It's like you said, it's a bizarre experience. I feel like this would have been a much more enjoyable movie if you and I had sat down together and watched this, and you were just laughing a lot about how I'm just this is so gross. What are they doing? Stuff like that. People playing off of each other. It's almost like the audience becomes part of, as you said, of the film itself, with the audience playing off of each other's reactions. People being grossed out, people laughing at that. People laughing, then other people laughing because it wasn't that funny, but these people thought it was funny. So, it's a whole thing. It's a whole sort of ecosystem that builds when you see something in a group setting like this. Because it has the ability to do that, I'm going to go ahead and add that 0.5 star. But on your own, it's just odd. It's just, there's something just uncomfortable about watching it by yourself. And I get sort of the same, and I think it has to do a little bit with the home video quality of it, which is, again, it's intentional. But something about that, when it looks as authentic as it is, makes me really uncomfortable. And I think it's just because home movies and stuff, in my mind, there's stuff that's meant to be viewed privately. There's a whole channel on YouTube of people who've bought these people just buy old camcorder tapes that they find at Goodwill or garage sales or stuff like this, and then they upload them to there. And there's just something just really uncomfortable about it, because it's almost like you're peeking into people's lives. I get that that's not the case here, but when you're watching it by yourself, and it's kind of, you said it's kind of sad to watch by yourself, and then you have that with the home video quality, it kind of just makes me a little uncomfortable too. like I said, and then with the stuff that was happening on screen, I felt the need to close the curtains. But yeah, so 1.5 pitchers of sweet tea from me. But yeah, but other than that, it was interesting though, as much as I disliked it just from my own personal taste. It was interesting to kind of dip your toe a little bit in this franchise and see, what this has been about all these years, sort of a thing.
Yeah, and I think it's long overdue. As I said, explaining, letting everyone know what I was thinking picking this. It's been long overdue. We talk about and part of it's like the show hasn't been around that long. We only do so many episodes a year, but it's like we need to actually start talking about some trash. I didn't want to go the route of let's review a bad movie on purpose. It's overplayed at this point. A lot of people do that for just easy content. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but I just don't think I think it's more interesting to look at something like this that a lot of quote unquote real critics think is trash and kind of take a second look. Because I do think there are redeeming qualities to films like this. And I do think giving it a fair shake is at least more than, we don't want to become the sort of people that believe in real versus, fake, not even fake art, but content made for better or worse people. I feel like that's kind of where it lands with feeling icky, this is cinema and that's not cinema, so
because
I think it's good. We might do stuff like this in the future.
About the skits in it, it draws a loyal fan base, and you have to why is that? And it can't just be, well, the entire audience is degenerates. That's such a cop-out response. So then you have to wonder why, maybe not as successful as it once was in the 90s, but why they can still release movies as recently as you said, as the fourth one or whatever one that just came out a few years ago, and still draw a substantial audience. And
exactly.
that's an interesting thing to look at this movie from, is what about this really draws people. And I think you really hit it on the head with how it becomes an audience. It's a very audience interactive movie. I kind of put it in the category of, what is that one movie that runs all the time around Halloween?
Rocky Horror.
Rocky Horror.
No, and that's the thing too. I didn't really get into that, but it does kind of borrow a lot of the same appeal as what they called midnight movies from the 70s. Which I mentioned, Pink Flamingos was one, Eraserhead by David Lynch was one. Just a lot of things you almost kind of watch for shock value or because it's weird or, just something to kind of challenge yourself, I guess. It's very much that. You didn't have to watch it at midnight, but it is the sort of thing, if it ever does become a dead franchise, I do wonder if, when I'm 70 or something, if my grandkids are going to be going to midnight screenings of Jackass, where, I don't know, they do stuff like Rocky Horror, where there's, certain points in the movie where all the crowd yells out the same thing, or if they, everyone arrives wearing crutches, or, little things like that. But what do you guys think? Leave a comment, as I said, if this is the first time listening to the show. Check out our backlog. We've talked about tons of movies, and we're only just getting started. But anyway, until next time, I've been Whiskey.
I've been Sweet Tea.
Keeping it Kino.
And suck it, Scorsese. Also, warning, Scorsese, don't try to recreate this. You can't do it.
Oh, boy. Well, talk to you guys later. Next time, we'll be reviewing another piece of trash, but from a very different era.
Yes, most definitely. Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Reels on the Rocks is a production of La Prince Laboratories. It is edited and produced by Alejandro Castillo and features original artwork by Asa Esparza and original music by Pat Mars. Follow us on Twitter at Reels on the Rocks and tweet at us with any movies or topics you'd like us to discuss in the future.